Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second in a series of parent workshops that are developed to address students' mental health well-being and their overall emotional state. Tonight we have a real treat. We have Lane Whitaker, the Professional Development Director from ESS, who is going to be discussing the trauma-informed model. We hope that you enjoy the presentation. We hope that you continue to join us for the remainder of our parent workshops. So, Lane?
Working? Here we go. Hello? Oh, great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm just really excited that this topic is really in the forefront of everyone's minds and that we're recognizing the importance of mental health and that it's just as important and impactful on our lives as our physical health. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about the trauma-attuned model, which is ESS's proprietary blend of trauma-informed care. And so I'm really happy to be coaching in this district this year at several schools where we have some champions who are really doing a lot of the work that you're going to hear me talk about tonight, that we're creating trauma-informed or trauma-attuned learning communities. And you're going to hear a lot of the principles that go into that. And so these are all things that can be applied at home as well. So this will kind of be a dual lens that I discuss this from tonight. Part of it is a parent perspective, and also to kind of inform you about the changes that we're trying to impart in the districts using the trauma-attuned model, just to kind of give you some insight what's going on with the coaching. So let's get going. Before I do that, though, let me just tell you a little bit about my background. So I was at the New Jersey Department of Children and Families for 15 years, and there I worked with several populations. I worked with first children on the spectrum, which I really enjoyed. It was early on in my career, in my early 20s. And then I started working with teen moms, and I really enjoyed this work. A lot of my teen moms, though, were all below the poverty line, so there was a lot of trauma, a lot of generational trauma. And this was clearly impacting their ability to be successful academically. And I quickly found that until we addressed the deficits because of that trauma, that it was very difficult to get any academic learning done. So that's where I begin to really see the importance, the value of addressing mental health above all. And relationship we'll talk about today too. It's just paramount to addressing those issues. So let's go ahead and get into it. So some of our objectives for today are: upon completion of this training, participants will be introduced to the trauma-attuned model, or you'll hear me refer to it as TAM from time to time. We'll gain general knowledge or general understanding of trauma foundations, and then we'll be introduced to the PART, P-A-R-T. That's the 4 core components of the trauma-attuned model. So first, let's get into our introduction. So our traditional approaches to trauma response, and not only trauma response, but generally in a lot of our homes even, this is our traditional ways of disciplining and addressing challenging behaviors, is the authoritarian approach. I was certainly raised this way. That is, you do what I say. That's often because I said so, is the response to why do I have to, or why, right? Because I said so, right? It's sort of, this is not a democracy kind of attitude, right? We focus on compliance. In a school scenario, it's often very limiting of movement, especially as children get older. You think about when we are in elementary school, there's a lot of centers, or even preschool, there's a lot of centers, opportunities for kids to learn through all 5 senses, right? Where they are constantly playing and learning with their hands. It's very invigorating. It makes a lot of opportunities for curiosity, right? But as we get older, we kind of tend to want kids to sit at their desk, and we wait there for the whole class period. So a lot of times we start to limit movement. I will say though, I'm speaking in general terms, but I was just saying how I'd recently been at this high school, and I was really impressed with the way that you're already addressing a lot of that. There was a lot of hands-on learning that was extremely impressive in your district. Oftentimes, the traditional approach limits sensory modulation. Again, you think about younger kids having centers where they really got to explore with all their senses. And we sort of limit that as kids get older in middle school and in high school. It's often product-oriented. We're concerned, to think about this in home life too. A lot of times we're concerned about the grade. What did you get though on the test? What did you get on the report card? Are we more concerned about the grade or the journey, the learning process? Being curious, the setbacks, the comebacks, the resiliency. We tend to focus less on that and more on the product. But did you get an A? Did you get the B? I know that my mom was the mom that saw the report card and she was going to focus on the one bad grade. If there was all A's, well, what is up with this B? What's up with this C? Right? So oftentimes product-oriented, punishment-based. There's often the consequence needs to be something that's a little painful, right? That we want there to be something, oh, wonderful, thank you. If I can, the one in the back, though. Like right in front of the, I'm talking about the lights, if I can get the one right in front of the screen, but if not, no worries. It's often punishment-based, right? We want, but whether it be in school or at home, oftentimes we want there to be some discomfort, right? We want there to be some discomfort around making that decision again the next time, right? And that tends to be more the authoritarian model. The goal is social compliance. I want you just to comply. That's what we normally get with the traditional approach. With the trauma-attuned approach, we're coming from more safe, more nurturing, more supportive, process-oriented. The goal is social cooperation. Because my audience is mostly parents right now, the problem with being a parenting teacher and knowing a lot of this about behavior is that you can't turn it off, right? It's like knowing how to read, you can't even glance at a sign without reading it. And so I was with some friends recently and just seeing in their home, and they're wonderful parents, but you can see how we can, how we tend to go in that authoritarian mode sometimes. And so while we were having a good time and talking, their daughter got really excited and came over and just interrupted the conversation. And mom and dad said, "Excuse me, you're supposed to say, excuse me, you don't just come in here and interrupt like that." And the embarrassment of having that done in front of everyone started to put that child in their stress response, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. And you saw the symptoms of that was that child started to hyperventilate a little bit. Well, I thought that, no, you need to stop right now and head in and whatever it was, right? And that kind of creates this, that stress response. When we're in our stress response, we're very unlikely to make good choices. We're very unlikely to be able to access the part of our thinking brain. So that's just a little taste for now. We'll talk more about that, but let's think about how that authoritarian mode does manifest in both school and at home sometimes. So we want to create a more safe, more nurturing, more supportive, process-oriented, where we're concerned about the learning. Yes, you made a bad choice, but how did we get here? What can we do differently? So I tend to never want to just read straight off the slide, but I think this is important because this is very carefully worded and very crafted. So I'm going to read it. The trauma-attuned model is a relationship-based model, evidence-centered model. The goal is to help adults strengthen their resiliency through awareness of trauma and its effects on overall health, development, and success. When adults strengthen and model their own resiliency, it will naturally strengthen the resiliency of the children and their care as well. It's a powerful way to become more attuned to the traumas of self and others to promote healthy growth and achievement. So if you'll notice, I don't have any kids here in front of me tonight. I only have adults, teachers, parents, because I'm not asking our kids to do anything differently. I'm asking for the adults in our kids' life to change the way that they're doing things, the way that they're operating things, and I assure you, kids will respond to you differently. So a lot of this stuff that we're hearing is mindset, but the more that we are creating more resilient adults that are more centered and emotionally well-regulated, then you're going to see that, oh, am I out of my range? Okay. I have to stay in a certain range here so we can be seen on camera. So yeah, we're going to be working on strengthening the resiliency of adults. It is the adults that if they are knowing how to calm and regulate their own emotions, then that's when we can really help students and children regulate theirs. So trauma foundations, we first want to kind of define trauma. A response to actual or perceived threats in the context of uncertainty about our capacity to manage that threat. So we know stress, there's moderate levels of stress when we're running late for something. Oh gosh, I don't want to be late for the concert. Oh, I really want to see them get the call out. I want to see the opening act and all that. Oh, I hope we get there in time. That's manageable stress, right? I'm a little worried about it, but it's manageable stress. If I have a big presentation, maybe I'm not into public speaking, that's going to create some stress for me, but that's very tolerable. I know that there's an end time, it's over after this date. But it's really like, you know, when it starts to get a little heavier, a little thicker, a little longer lasting, that it's sometimes a cataclysmic event. When a child feels intensely threatened by an event, he or she is involved in or witnesses, we call that event a trauma. So let's kind of make the distinction between the two. So stress is a situation that imposes a special hardship. We think about something going on at work, a stressful situation at work. I know, again, that this week, it's going to be a little stressful, but I can make it through that stressful time. If I'm a student, yes, I may have some finals coming up this week, and it's a stressful week, right? Presents a challenge to our physical, emotional health. Maybe I'm not sleeping well that week while I have finals. Maybe I know during that time of work, it's going to disrupt my life in a little bit. It can elicit a heightened state of physiological arousal. When I say physiological, I'm talking about a chemical response. I'm talking about the release of cortisol and the stress hormones. And we know that that can impact our physical health in a variety of ways. And it can be felt directly by children and indirectly through the child's primary relationships. So a big part of what we're doing with teachers is to strengthen their resiliency, to make sure that they're not bringing the stressors from their home lives or from the day-to-day in school, preventing them from being able to discipline from a regulated place, right? Because we know that sometimes at just the very beginning of class, am I in the range here? We know sometimes just at the beginning of a class, being a teacher for so long, just starting the class, you can be greeted with a lot of chaos at the beginning of a class. Did you get my papers, the homework in? Did someone just call my mom? I don't know what time the thing is, and the teacher is greeted with a lot of chaos. So this is why we've created something called transition resets. So transition resets are being implemented in your schools right now with the people that we are coaching in this trauma attuned model. What is a transition reset? So resetting our stress response, right? That we know that we have these stressors, and by coming into a classroom and having a moment to recalibrate, to compose ourselves, to take a minute for ourselves, can do wonders, right? And for the teacher as well, it's equally as important for that teacher to be taking that moment of mindfulness, because they do create the weather. They do set the tone for the classroom. And when students feel that something is not, amiss with the adults in their life, whether that be at home or at school, it affects the way that they feel and the perceived threats that they have, and it affects their stress response and thus their behavior as well. So that's why it's so important that the adults in students' life, both at home and at school, are also well-regulated and managing stress well. So again, there's these 3 levels of stress. There's a continuum. I talked about that normal or routine stress, our day-to-day life stress, running and ripping, and we've got all these soccer games coming up this weekend. How will we manage it all kind of stress, right? Tolerable but depleting stress. Again, maybe there's something going on. We're selling the house. It's a big deal right now, and there's a lot of stress. It's been going on for months. Then that toxic or traumatic stress. This may be something that's ongoing. This may be there's an alcoholic in the home. This could be there's some type of abuse taking place, something that is lengthy, that it's not a single event. So I have a video here. I'm going to have you cue it up. This is a really interesting video. Has anyone here ever heard of ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences? Oh, wonderful. So adverse childhood experiences are just that. You'd be surprised that I think about 67% of the population in this country has had at least one ACE. I'm going to talk about mine a little bit later. My mother died of breast cancer when I was in high school, and yes, that was definitely an ACE for me. But there are we'll talk a little bit more about ACEs, but here she's talking about the toxic toll that adverse child experiences or that ongoing chronic stress can do to your physical and emotional health. So if you could cue that video for me.
You've heard them all. Wear your seatbelt. Don't smoke. Don't drink and drive. These are all pieces of advice that we're accustomed to hearing. But they become second nature only because of effective public health campaigns. It takes time and persuasion to change behavior. Tonight, pediatrician Nadine Burke-Harris shares her humble opinion on what she sees as a grave threat to many children, one she believes has been misdiagnosed and overlooked.
10 years ago, at my pediatric clinic in San Francisco, teachers, social workers, and parents were bringing me child after child with concerns of ADHD. As I examined my patients, I noticed that the highest rate of behavioral problems was occurring in the kids whose parents had drug addictions or mental illness, or those who were subject to violence at home. When I dug into the science, what I found was that for most of these kids, the problem wasn't run-of-the-mill ADHD. For most of my kids, the real problem was what the American Academy of Pediatrics now recognizes as toxic stress. Ultimately, it all boils down to our fight or flight response, what happens in our bodies when we experience something scary. But when activated too often, like with repeated abuse or neglect or parental addiction, it can change the structure and function of children's developing brains. It can affect their hormones, the immune system, even the way DNA is read and transcribed. And it dramatically increases the risk of both behavioral and health problems in childhood and adulthood. Toxic stress affects white kids, black and brown kids, rich, poor, urban, rural. In other words, it can affect anyone and it can happen anywhere. But right now, only 4% of pediatricians in the US are screening for toxic stress. Most haven't received any training on how to identify kids who are at risk. This has to change. Too many children with behavioral symptoms of toxic stress are being labeled with ADHD and given stimulants without any identification of the root cause. And many kids show no behavioral symptoms at all, yet they are still more than twice as likely to go on to develop asthma, autoimmune disease, heart disease, and cancer. And their life expectancy can be cut short by decades. More than 34 million American children have had at least one adverse childhood experience, like witnessing violence at home or being sexually molested. We need every medical professional in this country to be equipped with the right tools for universal screening. When identified early, doctors, educators, and caregivers can help reverse the biological effects of childhood trauma. Together, we can give every child a shot at a healthy life.
You can stop it there. Hello? Okay. You can flip to it. Perfect. So yes, what she's talking about is those adverse childhood experiences and the connection between our physical health as well. And so we know that the more ACEs that there are, and they can add up pretty quickly. In fact, you can take your own ACEs test if you'd like, it's online, and you'd be surprised by the questions what your own score may be once you really start to do it. And I think that the numbers are actually not represented as high as they actually are, because a lot of it requires self-recording. But even with the self-recording, the numbers are astonishing, and they were trending that way even before the pandemic. You can imagine now how many more ACEs there are. We've all experienced at least one universal ACE through this pandemic. The pandemic has become sort of an ambient trauma for all of us. So while there may have been, segments of our population that experienced a lot of ACEs prior to the pandemic, we now can all say we've experienced at least this one ACE of the pandemic, of course to varying degrees for some of us. So some of the challenges of trauma, and the children affected by trauma often present with many behavioral and emotional challenges. And that video they just said some kids don't have any behavioral challenges. So I said earlier that my mother passed of breast cancer. She was diagnosed when I was in 6th grade, and she died when I was 17, my junior year of high school. And you think about 6th grade, the things that are going on just normally in a child's life in 6th grade, right? Socially, emotionally, your bodies are changing, hormones. That was a big year for, I was taking language that year. I just started French and algebra. And this type of trauma, or that type of chronic stress or toxic stress, can do so much damage to your stress response that it can affect you academically. It may not necessarily affect you behaviorally. I didn't have any behavior problems, but I had academic problems because I didn't have the bandwidth. And so that kind of thing wasn't recognized in the 90s. I'm really glad that we are now so much more aware of this and are equipping our teachers to notice this, to be more aware of this and be more sensitive to it. So they also struggle with challenges related to trust, safety, and security. These challenges then translate to difficulties with learning. Again, I don't have the bandwidth if I am preoccupied with my trust, safety, and security. It's difficult for a brain to be both curious and scared at the same time. I can't hold space for curiosity when I'm worried about trust, safety, and security. And if I fear that in some places, I fear that that may not be available to me everywhere. I may already come to school not feeling the trust, the safety, security. I'm constantly I will get up on my soapbox real quick about kids in hoodies. I don't think that there's one child who wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to put this hoodie on because I really just want to mess with everybody at my school. I want to just be a problem with my hoodie today. That's my mission in life. But what we'll start to understand is the more we learn about the stress response, it's sort of seeing a turtle. If we see a turtle on the side of the road and we want to play with that turtle, the turtle is scared. What does the turtle do? That turtle will put their head inside their shell, right? And we know that that's a sign that the turtle's scared. And so we would normally leave it alone for a little while and let it know that we're here. And eventually that turtle will come out and get curious again. Go, what's out here? Is it safe? And they may retreat and come back out and retreat and come back out until they realize they're in safety. And so a lot of times I understand why we have rules like hoodies in schools, particularly in the hallways, so we can view everyone. But understand that that's a child telling you I'm in my stress response. That there's something that I'm fearing, that I don't have safety, security, or trust in some way. And now, while whatever it is that they perceive that is causing that may not be something that is keenly aware or that we can see or feel, that doesn't mean that they're not feeling that or perceiving that, and that their behavior is not reflecting that. So when we see the kid with the hoodie, I'm always telling teachers, give them some time. When you give them some time to feel comfortable, just like that turtle, eventually the hoodie will come off by itself. Or you find someone who does have a relationship with that person, who does have trust and safety with that person, so that they can say, hey, just for a little bit, I need you to take that. Thank you so much. And this is just one example of that. So children whose because again, now too, if I have a teacher or a parent or someone who's fussing at me about that, now I'm feeling either embarrassed, ashamed, or that threat is getting bigger rather than smaller, and I may vacillate to be, we talk about our fight, flight, or freeze. I may get more combative as this threat increases rather than getting smaller. I may now have to escape this room and leave, elope, because the threat is still, looming. So types of trauma. So there is what we call little t trauma and big T trauma. We're talking about little t trauma. We're not saying that it's, we're not minimizing it. Let me say that. What we're saying is that it's usually a single event that can have, a lot of damage for years if it goes untreated or unhealed. However, type 2 trauma is ongoing. Type 2 trauma can go on for years and years and years. So some examples, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means. So type 1, a single event, a dangerous or isolated or sudden event. Usually the response to a little t trauma is that we recall that memory of that vividly. You may have been in a car accident or something that was very traumatic. You may replay it over and over and over in your mind. Fortunately though, there's a quicker recovery time, usually a better prognosis when it's that little t trauma, especially with early intervention with treatment. Examples could be a motor vehicle accident, a natural disaster, homicide, a suicide, a single event. I'll leave it there. Type 2 trauma, again, multiple, chronic. So the response is that usually these memories are fuzzy. Often we disassociate to protect ourselves from this ongoing trauma, and there's different ways that we could disassociate. Character changes, long-standing problems. This is a child in survival mode, or a person in survival mode. I'm in survival mode, and so it's hard for me to have excellent behavior or academic skills or really anything, relationships, if I'm constantly in survival mode. So some examples of this could be a hostage situation, sexual abuse, physical abuse, racism, discrimination. So the developmental context of exposure to trauma. Exposure to trauma disrupts the process of neurological brain development. So this is why they mentioned in that video that it can actually decrease your life expectancy. It can decrease your life expectancy, these types of traumas, because of the constant, you think about all that cortisol and adrenaline flooding our organs. And again, in those short bursts, that would give me we either have to fight, it's giving me the energy to pump my blood up and puff me up to make me strong enough to fight this beast in front of me, or it's going to give me that extra, burst of energy I need to run from this beast. Or maybe I can be perfectly still and stoic and hope that this beast passes me by, that they think I'm a statue, that I'm so still and quiet, right? And that's how we see these things manifest at home and at school, these behaviors. That fight kid who's in fight mode is going to be that kid who's really disruptive, that's really nasty. That there's some physical or emotional threat I see. And by the way, when I talk about emotional threat, I could be talking about feeling shame, guilt, isolation, depression, anxiety, fear. And so when these feelings are triggered, it often leads to that person being in their stress mode. And we all have a preferred way that we like to go into our stress response. That doesn't mean that we don't vacillate. But you can ask yourself here today, what is mine? I'll tell you my preferred is to fight. If I feel there's some emotional or physical threat in front of me, I'm going to primarily go to fight mode. That doesn't mean that I might not vacillate to flight or freeze, but that's going to be my primary one. And so then that freeze kid is often the kid in the bathroom at school who is often trying to find the school nurse. At home, they're trying to find maybe the parent that is more comforting or trying to escape something. And so these are all versions of this child being in self-protection mode. And so if we're missing the signs, both as parents and teachers, the threat gets bigger rather than helping quell it so that we can get back into our frontal lobe where we practice good decision making, impulse control, good decisions. And by the way, that part of our brain, our frontal lobe, is not done developing until about 25. So our school-age children or our children in our homes, assuming that they're only in your home till about 18, are never going to be fully developed in that frontal lobe by the time they leave our homes or our high schools. So we have to be, again, this is why the onus is on us adults to be the ones to make sure that we are leading and disciplining from a regulated place. And it's unfortunate because we didn't really have those opportunities as kids. That's why this work is so important. Did anyone here ever think about regulating their emotions under the age of 30? Anyone? No? No one ever had to talk with you about it in school? There wasn't a class about how we regulate emotions? Anyone here? No? Really? I didn't get that either. But somehow we have sort of a social contract with one another that we should all know how to calm ourselves, and if you don't, there's going to be some serious consequences and repercussions. And as adults, we'll tell our kids, you need to calm down, often while we're yelling it. Right? You need to calm down. How are we modeling how we calm ourselves? And so we are, as adults, are just as, we have the same range of emotions as our kids. And those emotions can easily be triggered too and trigger our past traumas as well. And so if we're in our stress response, then now you've got two people in their stress response trying to duke it out. But the adults usually got the power, right? That's the power dynamic. So at all developmental levels, the development of emotional and behavioral problem symptoms can be seen as attempts at restitution and self-protection. We need to kind of reframe some of the behaviors that we're seeing. Our kids aren't out to get us. They're not out to ruin our lives. They weren't inherently evil. They're not, I promise they're not. They are in survival mode. They're in survival mode. And we don't make good decisions when we're in survival mode. And they are nowhere near fully developed in their decision-making part of their brain. Far, far from it. So ACEs, we talked about this a little bit already, adverse childhood experiences. So ACEs, I'm going to skip that one, let's talk about this one instead. So can you see this from here? Hopefully you can see it. Is it big enough from here? I'm going to kind of go around this slide. Yeah, take a picture. This is a good one. So First, traumatic events or adverse childhood experiences are traumatic events that can have negative, lasting effects on health and well-being, right? So here we have household challenges, abuse, and neglect. Again, this is not even an exhaustive list. But we've got domestic violence. And by the way, domestic violence doesn't always have to be physical violence. It could be emotional abuse that the kids are witnessing. It could be verbally violent that the kids are witnessing. And so think about that. We can have either emotional, physical, emotional abuse going on in the home. And by the way, I want to bring your eyes down just a little bit below those 3 circles there. Do you see that people with 6 ACEs or more can die 20 years earlier than expected? 20 years, that's 2 decades, I just said. 2 decades can be taken off your life if you have 6 or more ACEs. Now you may think, well, that's a lot of ACEs. But let's think how quickly we can get there. Let's say there's a mental health issue in the home. Let's say someone's bipolar. Let's say that person's not getting treated for bipolar disease and is self-treating with illicit drugs. So now that's 2 ACEs. We've got drug use, we've got mental illness. We're probably going to tend to start being a little neglectful if I've got mental health issues and a drug issue. So there could be now emotional and or physical neglect. Well, if there's drugs and all this neglect going on, well then that might get DIFUS in there, DCF in there, right? So kids could be removed, parents could be separated from children, there could be some incarceration. Look how quickly this score is adding up. What am I at now? I think I might even be over 6. We could add some racism in there, some discrimination. Very quickly adds up, right? So an 1/8 of the population has at least 4 or more ACEs. I want to take your eyes now over to the right side of the screen, 4 or more ACEs. The levels of lung disease are 3 times more likely if you've got 4 ACEs. 11 times more likely the level of intravenous drug abuse. 14 times the number of suicide attempts. 4 times as likely to have begun intercourse by age 5, and that, by the way, that's the population that I work with, teen moms. I was incredibly naive and very judgmental about them when I first started working with those amazing young ladies. I thought that that's what happens when you're playing with fire. But a lot of these girls saw their pregnancies as an opportunity to get my needs met, to have a baby that will love me, to get me out of this home. Maybe my boyfriend will get me out of this bad situation. Oh, one didn't do it, maybe if I have that second baby, maybe he'll get me out of here. A lot of it is trauma. A lot of it is that they see that this is a solution to my problems if I have this baby. I've always wanted someone to love me. So now I want to take you to this pyramid here. At the bottom of the pyramid, we have the adverse childhood experience, and then that causes the way that our DNA is read and transcribed to be altered. That's when we talk about generational trauma, that's what I'm talking about. Again, remember we're talking about these stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. And so this is why doctors are always emphasizing how much mom needs to be calm during pregnancy so that those hormones aren't passed on to baby. So that when mom is nursing, she is not nursing cortisol and adrenaline to baby. These things happen in a home, and it changes the way DNA is read and transcribed to make a child more hypervigilant, more likely to be in their stress response and fall into it more easily. So then if we've got disrupted neurological development now, that often will lead to social, emotional, cognitive issues in school. All right, that's hard to manage all that in the school setting. Now after that leads to the adoption of health risk behaviors. And then ultimately, that's going to lead to disease, disability, social problems, and early death. This becomes much more possible. So let's blow this out a little bit more. Adverse childhood experiences, you're more likely to have a traumatic brain injury, fractures, burns. That sounds like an odd one. Why would that happen? Well, think about this. Remember that neurological disruption that is caused by this trauma? That changes, oh, am I out of the range? That changes your pleasure reward center of your brain. Changes the pleasure reward center of your brain. So I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like one of the top 3 or in the top 5 things that kill young people, teenagers, is car accidents. Because so many teenagers have to drive their car as fast as they can. This is why I gotta ride my bike down 50 steps, or I gotta jump off a bridge. I gotta do something really wild to get the same type of pleasure that someone who has not had this type of trauma might have from having a piece of chocolate cake or having a nice bath after a long day. But I need a lot more excitement to give me that same level of joy or bliss that you feel from something much more mundane. So that's why I'm much more likely to have these issues. Depression, anxiety, suicide, PTSD, unintended pregnancy, or even complication and fetal death. HIV, STDs. Because again, promiscuity is going to be one of those things that's going to be part of my pleasure reward system, also wanting to feel loved. So that could very easily lead to STDs and HIV. Cancer and diabetes, if my internal organs are under this type of stress and cortisol and adrenaline, that's a lot on my kidneys, on my adrenal glands, on my liver. It's very toxic. Alcohol and drug abuse. I don't want to change the way I feel. And remember that pleasure reward again. And then of course that's all going to really impact my opportunities to be successful in school and my chances of making meaningful income. So now let's talk about the part. And by the way, before I move on, that was incredibly depressing, right? I want to say something that can cheer you up about that, is that it only takes one adult to buffer or mitigate the effects of trauma. One adult that cares. So I mentioned before that I had a trauma. My mother passed away of cancer when I was in high school. But I think what kept me together, what kept my feet firmly planted on the ground, of course I was still grieving. I had some serious trauma. It took a while to work through that. But I think what really kept me firmly planted on the ground is because I was in an amazing school environment where we all lived on campus. My teachers all cared. I saw them at dinner time. I was part of their families, was invited to their homes on campus. I had all these adults that cared about me, were looking out for me. I had community, I had belonging, which we'll talk about are key elements to a child's success. And so you can be that person. It takes one person to really buffer and mitigate those effects of a child's trauma. So I want to now introduce to you the PART, P-A-R-T. It's our acronym. How am I doing on time, by the way? I have no idea what time it is. 20 minutes. 15 minutes. Okay, we're motor through. All right, so PART is an acronym used to represent our 4 core components of the trauma attuned model. It's the fundamental belief of TAM that adult caregivers, again, we're focusing on adults, not necessarily the children here, can enhance the development of a child's resilience through strengthening and modeling their own resilience. Additionally, positive childhood experiences create a framework or mindset through which children can develop resiliency based on belief and response systems. So this is done through understanding, attunement, and insight. So that means that we are working hard to understand the behavior before we punish it. That I'm going to start asking you or tell you what I need you to do, and rather than complain about what you're not doing. I'm going to focus on, do I want the behavior to stop, or do I want to shame or guilt you? I think that's one of our issues in this society, just in general. I can only speak for this country. But yeah, we tend to really want to use shame and guilt to discipline. And that's traumatic and has long-lasting effects. So PART, how prevalent is trauma? And by the way, I just want to mention too, this is a truncated version for you all tonight, because I could go on about this topic, as you knows, for at least 6 hours. So I am going to kind of just kind of touch on this topic. You're more than welcome to take a picture. But the PART is prevalence, affect, response, and triggers. So why trauma too? Because over 25% of American youth experience a serious traumatic event by their 16th birthday. It's not a one-size-fits-all. I've heard people say, well, I've had trauma and I didn't act like that, and I moved on. You cannot compare your trauma to anyone else's. Completely different set of circumstances, buffers, your personal makeup, your personality, your ability, your resilience. You cannot compare traumas. You don't know what supports one person had over another. Cannot compare traumas. And also the chronicity of events, how long was it going on? All these things are difference makers, impact on development. What age were you when these things happened? At what point in your development were you when this thing happened to you? And the resilience of the individual. What kind of aftercare was there? So signs of trauma. This is mom, dad, teachers, where you're really going to see the signs of trauma. Behavior, relationships, and academic performance. So behavior. you're going to really see us fall into 3 to 4 categories, right? We're going to see the explosive, highly aroused child, that fight. When we talk about fight, flight, or freeze, we're going to see that kid who's in fight mode. That's an aggression, defiance, hyper-arousal, impulsiveness. Then we're going to see that kid who's in flight mode. That's our elopers. That's the one that's got to get out of class. That's the one who's got to get away from whatever is that perceived threat. I have to escape it, withdraw, dissociate, put my hoodie over my head. That's the kid who has their head on the desk the whole time. They may be listening to every word, by the way. But if their head is on the desk the whole time, that's me withdrawing, escaping. We often see in that other, at the other extreme again is that flight mode, where we see the head down on the desk. Sometimes we can see disassociation there. That whatever this feeling, I'm so flooded by this feeling, could be shame, guilt, whatever it is, that I have to sort of leave my body for a moment to be able to deal with that struggle of that pain, the impact of that. And we certainly know that that happens with sexual abuse a lot too. So academic performance. So this is where I really struggled. Didn't have a lot of behavior issues, struggled academically, because I did not have the bandwidth for algebra and all of its accumulations, because I was concerned about if my mom was going to make it through the summer, or even what this weekend would bring with her chemo and her treatments, right? So I had problems with memory. The hippocampus is the middle part of our brain, part of our mammalian brain. That is what has our memories, school memories, childhood memories, good, bad, everything in between. That's where we keep our memories, in the hippocampus. Hippocampus is affected by all that cortisol and adrenaline, can shrink the hippocampus. Makes it very difficult to remember things. So one of the stories I often tell was that I was in the math lab trying to get help, as always in math. And the teacher did the old I do, we do, you do method. So she did the algebraic problem. Remember, this algebra, so it was several steps to this equation. And then we did like 3 together. And then she said, it's your turn, go. And when I went to go do it, I didn't know what to do on the first step. She said, this is stop it. What are you doing? We just did this like 3, 4 times together. I didn't know, honestly, had no idea what the next step was. And I think she thought I was playing games. Now I'm in my stress response starting to like hyperventilate, because I'm like, why don't I know? I don't know what's going on either. Am I an idiot? Oh my God, I think I'm an idiot. I must be dumb. Turns out I wasn't an idiot. Turns out I did not have the bandwidth to be concerned about my mother and what my future looked like, and also have space for all this algebra and all the other things that came along with my freshman year of high school at this point. So the ability to sequence, it's very difficult to sequence when you are overwhelmed with trauma and traumatic stress, when you're constantly being flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. Ability to process information. If you feel like you're constantly repeating things to your child, or why don't they listen? You never listen, that's what it is. You don't listen. Maybe there's something else going on. Ability to read verbal and nonverbal cues. This is a big one. This is a big one I noticed a lot when I was teaching. I would have kids, especially with regard to like personal space, where you have a student that does not see that okay, you're really invading my personal space, I'm gonna take a big step back. And they're like, where are you going? Where are you going? And they're going right back for me. And they're just not picking up that I'm uncomfortable that you're in my space. And then this carries over, we'll talk about in relationships a little bit. But engagement and attention. Again, we talked about that a lot of times kids are being overdiagnosed with ADD and ADHD, when a lot of times it's intrusive thoughts. If I was up all night hearing my parents argue, or hear them say words like divorce, I might be in class and zone out and start thinking about that conversation, and oh my God, are they gonna get divorced? And then what's gonna happen to me? And I'm gonna have to go live here. Blah, 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 blah. I missed the whole math lesson. What? When I get called on? Now I'm gonna be my fight, flight, or freeze response. Well, I don't have to know, or whatever, because I'd rather get kicked out of class. I'd much rather be the dumb kid, or the bad kid than the dumb kid. Much rather, we found that always. But engagement and attention is going to be lacking if I'm preoccupied with things going on at home, or with some other trauma that I may have. And of course, my executive functioning, I already said, executive functioning is not fully developed till 25. So we talked about that neurological disruption that's associated with trauma. It's going to affect my executive functioning. That's where impulse control is taking place, reasoning, judgment, decision making, delayed gratification. So relationships, lack of self-awareness. So like I was just saying, that verbal and nonverbal cues. So a lot of time kids who have these issues tend to either find maladaptive peer groups, kids who are also experiencing these same types of issues and have, maybe have found some maladaptive coping skills as well, drugs or other risky behaviors. And so, or they're loners. Nobody can relate to them. No one gets me. No one understands me. I'm not picking up on their social cues. They're not, I don't know how to participate in social interactions. So that sometimes that child gets isolated or becomes a loner or says, I don't even want to try to have these social interactions anymore. I'm really bad at it. It's more painful to try. So you'll see decreased motivation to relate to others. And again, unable to read nonverbal cues. That kid just has an awkward time not understanding what the mood of the room, reading the tone of the room. So knowing the signals. Knowing the signals. When we're going with the red light, green light stop sign here, right? And we know green is go. That's at our optimal state when I'm feeling good, I'm ready to learn. And then yellow is, you know what, I'm feeling a little stressed out, feeling a little tense, something's going on. My amygdala, that's my middle part of my brain, is detecting that there's some type of emotional or physical threat. A lot of times it's more emotional in school and at home. I mean, sometimes there's physical threats too, but a lot of times it's more emotional. That's some other emotion, not anger. Anger is an umbrella for a lot of other emotions. Under anger could be, again, isolation, rejection, fear, anxiety, a host of other things, shame, guilt, a lot of other things. And so usually when one of those emotions gets triggered, then I might go into my fight, flight, or freeze, and a lot of times it's fight. So if it is fight, now I'm in the full-on crisis mode, feeling overwhelmed, highly emotional, possibly aggressive. This is that blackout phase, or even if we've all had a breakdown before, right? We've all got to that place where maybe you're doing the laugh cry, you're screaming, you cry till your eyes are just super swollen. We're in that red crisis mode. So when little people are overwhelmed by big emotions, it is our job as the adults to share our calm, not join their chaos. I think it's also important, I'm also a parenting teacher, so I work with a lot of individual families. And I've often seen families where the child is showing you, I'm stressed out right now by crying or having a big reaction. A lot of times parents say, you better stop that right now. Stop all that crying. Stop all that mess. And so we're telling our kids you can't even have your stress response. What are they supposed to do? So we need to kind of build compassion and reframe some of the things that we're seeing. These behaviors are signals. Behaviors are never the problem. They are symptoms of the problem. So, trauma-attuned culture. So as far as triggers, well, we're going to respond to triggers by creating safe spaces, building positive relationships. That's what a lot of our coaching is focusing on. As parents too, I encourage you to really focus on your relationship. The more relationship you have with your child, and that students and teachers have, the more likely you are to get that trust, safety, and then compliance. Or social cooperation, I should say more cooperation. Making connections, offer self-calming strategies. Again, those resets I talked about we're doing in school. And there are infinite resets. I have seen teachers get so creative with the ways that they offer resets. They're amazing, and parents too. And what's beautiful is kids will start to reset each other. They will start resetting you. You may have some kids coming home and seeing you in a tense moment, you need a reset. It happens. I've had a lot of parents call the school and go, what's it? My son just reset his little brother. What's that about? Because it's an amazing skill. When I learned that I have the awareness to understand that I'm in my stress response and I need to make a change, that I need to reset myself to a higher vibration right now, a higher frequency, it's incredible. And it wasn't something we got to learn. This embeds it in our school day. That every hour I have an opportunity to practice my emotional regulation skills. So children don't misbehave, they behave either positively or negatively to communicate. And this is true. There is a language of these behaviors. A lot of the behaviors that you may get calls home from school or be witnessing or experiencing yourself at home, they are symptoms, again, of a bigger problem. They're not the problem. And it's like, keep taking Advil over and over again and wondering why I still have this headache. Because you're only treating symptoms. So I have this great little exercise that we can do together real quick. We have a few minutes. So a lot of times we may call our kids some of these names, or some of these adjectives, I should say, with our trauma glasses off. We may say, no, my kid is being manipulative. This is what he does, he's manipulative. We might say, my kid is just lazy. He just won't do his homework. I'm on him all day, he won't do his homework, or she won't do her homework. That she's just resistant to everything I say, and anything I say or do, this kid is resistant. Unmotivated, disrespectful, attention-seeking. These are all adjectives that we might use to describe behaviors of our students and our children. But now I want you to think about some of the things that we talked about tonight. And I want you to think about what might those things really mean. What might be behind manipulative or lazy? What might be behind unmotivated? I'll start with one to give you an example. When I hear anyone's unmotivated, especially a student or a child, one of the first things I think about, well, how's their mental health? Are they depressed? Because I'm not very motivated when I'm depressed. And some kids, we should be glad that they even made it to school, that they got dressed and made it to school, because when you're depressed, it's hard to do that sometimes. And a lot of us adults will take a call out day and say, you know what, I need a mental health day today. I can't do it. But our kids are expected to show up every day. You got to show up every day and work through your stuff. So yeah, unmotivated could be a sign that maybe there's some depression going on here. They're screening for that much earlier now. I remember my kid he's 17 now. I remember he's 12. It's the first time they said, hey, we need you to leave the room. We're going to do a depression screening. It starts young. And I think even more so, kids have email accounts now in kindergarten. They're checking their email. And now Zoom over the pandemic, do you know how stressful all that is? Are you checking your email, keeping up? I didn't get my first email account until I was a senior in high school. I don't think I was really using it until college. Think about how stressful that is, how much more stressors kids have today. All right, so how about you guys in this audience? Can I get, what do you think might be behind lazy? Because I don't think lazy is a diagnosis. I have some therapists over here, and I don't think in the, what's the big book, the DSM? I don't think that there's, anyone says in the DSM that laziness is a disease. I don't think anyone's ever been diagnosed with laziness. Laziness is a symptom. So why might a child be lazy or be thought of as lazy? Does anyone want to take a stab at that one? What might be really going on for this child that they are acting lazy? Oh, yeah.
So initially you made it clear that they're lazy because they're not meeting your own expectations. Looking at lazy though, maybe it's because they're tired because mom and dad are fighting all night. Or maybe on the other side of the spectrum, maybe they're really trying to fit in, so they're up all night with the wrong crowd. And
yeah,
doing
maladaptive.
Or just on the computer till 4 in the morning, so they don't wake up. And I mean, studies will show that 7:30 in the morning is not really a good time for kids to go to school anyway with that trauma. So.
Very true, very true. They actually have it reversed, that the little kids should be going to school earliest and that the big kids should be going to school later, that they need more sleep. And the little guys, but I think it has more about childcare. So they're saying,
it's also what they're doing in school, right? I taught pre-K for 8 years also, so they go there, they have fun.
Yeah.
Our kids come here and they're generally expected to sit and do things that
right, because they're not doing the things the little guys are doing with playing with my hands.
They're also more consciously aware of what's going on at home instead of kind of innocent, hopefully oblivious for some amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So you hit the nail on it, several things. And so if there's all this chaos going on at home, I may be disorganized in my mind as well. So when a task is given to me, I don't even know where to begin. I don't even know where to begin because my mind is so chaotic inside. Or, just like you said, it could be that I'm super tired. I've been up all night. Have you ever been stressed out? How do you sleep when you're stressed out?
You don't sleep.
You don't sleep. And so this is why we have kids up all night. And then they start getting screen time. And why do we get screen time? Anyone know why screen time is so, and I see it's getting close. Darn it, I'm almost there. but why do you think screen time is so fun if I'm a kid who's, what were you gonna say? It's a great distraction, but also we talked about the stress hormones, but there's also something called happiness chemicals. We make 4 happiness chemicals too. Does anyone know what they are? Dopamine, and that's the one that the video games gave us. I'll talk about that in a second. What are the others? We've got oxytocin, dopamine, endorphins, and serotonin. Those are the happiness chemicals that the brain makes. Hack them over the summer with your kids. Find ways. There are so many amazing ways to hack those chemicals. Just a big FYI, as a parenting teacher, this is a huge parenting pro tip. Oxytocin, again, is the bonding chemical that makes our middle brain, the mammalian part of our brain, very happy, makes us feel connected, bonded, social creatures that we are. And so when that part of the brain is satiated, we release oxytocin. Oxytocin is that same thing. We got some fur mommies here, fur daddies, right? We love our animals. When we're petting, you got a new Bernedoodle right over here. Yeah, I got a new Bernedoodle. When she's petting that Bernedoodle, I'm sure there's oxytocin flying all over the place. When we are hugging our kid, and by the way, it takes about 22 seconds of a hug to release oxytocin. That sounds like a long time, right? And think about that. When you give a hug to somebody, when you decide you're going for it, you're like, oh, we're really hugging, okay. And then a few seconds and you're like, this is getting awkward, what's going on here? But if you wait a few more seconds, you start to settle into the hug, you're like, oh, this feels good. Oh, I see you smiling, you know it's true. You know it's true. We first give the church hug and somebody's like, no, we're doing this. And we fight it at first and then you're like, God, it does. That's oxytocin. Our children's brains require oxytocin to mature properly so we don't have that neurological disruption. It creates brain cells and brain development, oxytocin. So hug your kids. It takes about 12 hugs a day. 12 hugs a day. You need to hug your kids at least 12 hugs a day. That's a fun thing to do. And if you're not somebody that grew up in an affectionate family, you really need to make the effort because we're talking about their brain development, social development. And this is something that during the pandemic that a lot of kids were getting at school. That a lot of kids were getting that hug from their teacher, getting all loved up, and we weren't doing that during the pandemic. We weren't seeing their faces. We weren't seeing grandma and a lot of other people who give those good, really good hugs. So we gotta make up for lost time. That is a great way to get started, building relationship, building connection, and brain development. Oxytocin, give some hugs. Okay, so I know we're wrapping up, but I just wanna maybe do one more. I mean, what about disrespectful? Why would a kid be disrespectful? What does that mean when they're being disrespectful? Are they just a jerk? This kid's just a jerk and they're out to get me. Or does that mean something? What is that behavior trying to tell me? What are they getting from being disrespectful? Or what might be happening in their stress response? Yes?
Might be modeling behavior you see at home or in school.
Sure.
You don't know how to express yourself, so you curse at people because if you talk nicely, then it's a sign of softness. Your friends make fun of you, so you have to be tough for the kids around you.
Sure.
Interacting with the adults don't know you. Mm-hmm. And a lot of adults, they go to school and they're looking to kind of do what they have to do to present their content. Because I got 30 kids, so I can't really care about you as an individual. I mean, you don't pay as much attention. And then you don't deliver any message because they realize you don't care about them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, too, it's a way to get control. When we don't have that trust and safety, is usually when there's a lack of control, right? And so a way that we assert control is that I'm going to change the narrative where I control the narrative and I'm going to control it by being disrespectful. If I go on the offensive, now I've changed the narrative. I know I'm running overtime, so those of you have to go, I understand. But I would say that I had a student that I used to work with and that he would create all kinds of behaviors, be very disrespectful, just a lot of really intense behaviors, and it was all to mask the fact that he couldn't read. When we figured out he could read, he was like, oh my God, I'm so relieved to finally tell this because I was manufacturing these behaviors because again, I'd rather be the disrespectful kid than the dumb kid. I'd much rather be the kid that gets tossed out of here all the time than the kid that's dumb. I didn't want anyone to know that I was struggling in math. I didn't have the behaviors though, but I would certainly, that's where I would go from fight to flight. I would avoid at all costs math and anything that had to do with math. So thank you for participating in that. Here's just some of my things. Manipulative, getting needs met in the ways that have worked in the past. Whenever I hear manipulation for anyone, kids or adults, it is a way for protection. This is the only way I've learned to get my needs met is through manipulating. That's the only way that my needs get met. So that's what I have to do for survival. Lazy. Overwhelmed, lacking the skills to make decisions about what to do first and get organized. And by the way, these are some responses. These are not an exhaustive list either. Some of the things that you were saying are all potential causes as well. Resistant mistrust of others due to history of being hurt. Scared to make progress and then lose everything. Unmotivated, depressed, fearful, overwhelmed, and that freeze state. That unmotivated, sometimes we're talking about fight, flight, or freeze. You're seeing the kid in freeze. Disrespectful, feeling threatened, unsafe, out of control. So what do? I'm going to get big and get in control then. I'm going to change the narrative. I'm going to control, and I'm going to do it with my aggressive behavior. Attention seeking. I can't stand when I hear parents or teachers say, that's attention seeking behavior. I'm going to ignore that. Because number one, you're acknowledging a need and saying I'm going to ignore it, and then expecting it not to fester, which it always does. I can't think of anything we ignore that just goes away. It festers. So if there's attention, we're going to, and it's, by the way, it's never really attention, by the way. It's a kind of a misnomer. It is really relationship and connection that child is seeking. I need you to see me. I need you to interact with me. I need that because I'm a social creature. It is a huge part of my growth and development. I got to have those connections. And so I'm going to do it however I can. I might have to manipulate to get it. And a lot of times, maybe some of you have the nurture heart approach. It's one of my favorite things in the world. We know that energizing negativity is a favorite way of kids to manipulate, because we as adults are more than happy to tell them, the more problems you have, the more available I am. When things are good, I'm going to go look for problems. I'll see you later. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'll fly through this real fast, but this is probably one of my favorite things. Every child has to, remember the Care Bears? Do I have any 80s kids out here? Okay, good. Remember the Care Bears? Remember they all had the pictures on their chest? Imagine every child has that pyramid on their chest, just like a Care Bear. And every child needs to be worked with this pyramid every day. Now, some of us, we're sending our kids to school at the top of this pyramid. They're ready to learn. Some of our kids are having some of these issues aren't being addressed, and teachers are having to address all of this. They need to come in every day and work with each kid and find out where they are that day up here. Because we can't get to learning. We cannot get to learning until these other things are addressed. This is how our brain organizes, prioritizes the things in our life. And academics is last. So until these other things are addressed, I'm not doing that social studies. I don't care about art. I don't care about whatever topic it is. I first need to make sure my physical and things are met, that I have my breakfast, that I've had a clean bed to sleep in, that I have my physical needs are taken care of. I don't have a stomach ache, I don't have a headache, I'm good to go. Because all those things could prevent me from learning, right? If I'm sick, I don't feel good, I haven't gone to the bathroom, whatever it is. Safety. Do I feel safe? Or do I feel like I'm going to be attacked here or put down or criticized? Do I have belonging? Do I feel like I have friends? Do I have a community? Do I feel like I'm celebrated, a valued part of this community? Do I have esteem? Do I believe that I can do it? Do I believe that I can use my risk-taking behaviors to answer this question, even though I don't really know the answer, than to use my risk-taking behaviors to do bad things? And then finally, that's when I can get to learning. Once those things have been addressed, and there's no way to skip over any of it, period. Now again, a lot of you are doing an amazing job. We're coming up and you're already at the top of the pyramid, and your kids are ready for learning. But we're not all there. So everyone has an invisible sign around their neck saying, make me feel important. I don't have time for that. But I just want to say thank you so much for being with me here tonight. This was just a little sample of some of the work that we're doing with your teachers in your district right now. Really excited about this professional development project we have going. And pretty soon we'll have all of those schools doing transition resets too. So they'll be learning those mindfulness skills. I actually have an article up on our website right now. ESS was just published last Wednesday, all about transition resets, the benefits and mindfulness in our classrooms, the studies that show how much it works. And that is what we're going to be doing in your districts, teaching our kids how to recognize when we need to alter our mood and our emotional state, and the skills to do so, which a lot of us did not get growing up. So again, this is really groundbreaking, exciting that we're providing this for your kids. And you can support this work by doing some of these things at home too. Realizing, wow, maybe I'm yelling right now, I need a reset. I cannot discipline when I'm yelling. I cannot discipline when I'm criticizing. I cannot have my child be scared and also curious at the same time. Ask for the change that you want. Let's not complain about what they haven't done or the way they did it. Just tell me what you need me to do. So there's so much more. I could talk forever about this. I'd love to do some more trainings with you, in the coming year. But thank you so much for being here with me tonight. Thank you so much for everybody at home that's joined in. Hopefully you got to see me. I apologize. I am a walker all around. I tried. But thank you so much, everybody. I'll be around for any questions. Okay?